Shocking statement. The U-2 didn't just get shot down by the Soviets, it helped shoot down its own cover story. The wreckage did the talking. In this episode, we trace how a high-altitude camera platform, so delicate pilots wore pressure suits, was celebrated as a weather plane right up to the moment Khrushchev produced the pilot, the film, and the airframe. We'll show the operational doctrine from the Nevada ranch to the missile engagement over the Urals, then the propaganda blast that fractured a Paris summit before it began. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. How do you map a closed arsenal without crossing the tripwire? You need photos with enough ground truth to count missiles, measure gantry shadows, and locate fuel depots. And you need to get them without a bomber formation announcing itself on radar from border to border. After early overflights by modified bombers drew increasingly dense tracking, the intelligence gap widened. Washington wanted strategic warning on long-range missiles, nuclear test ranges, and deployment patterns, and it wanted it months before a launch complex went operational. Conventional reconnaissance at medium altitude was denied by radar-directed guns and interceptors. The requirement hardened into something simple and harsh: deliver high-resolution imagery deep inside defended airspace, or accept ignorance and guesswork. Conventional aircraft could not survive that route profile. They were fast but not high enough, and the network of look-down radar and climb-ready fighters could mass at predicted intercept points. Balloons drifted with poor control and left wreckage and payloads scattered as diplomatic handouts. And although film-returned satellites were on the drawing board, the launch cadence and re-entry recovery chain did not yet exist in an operational sense. It was therefore a choice between bad options, unless altitude itself could be used as a shield. Lockheed's answer was deliberately narrow. Strip mass, stretch the wing, chase laminar flow, and keep drag down at a Reynolds number where the air is thin and unforgiving. The result was a glider-like airframe with a long-span wing, minimal structural redundancy, and a fuselage packed with film and optics rather than armor or defensive systems. The camera suite was the point, with focal length selected so that at extreme height, you could still read layout geometry on a launch site and not just see a blur of concrete. That altitude mattered. Around 70,000 feet, most 1950s fighters ran out of climb, and early surface-to-air missiles lacked reliable reach and fusing at the edge of the stratosphere. But the trade-off sat in a narrow band called the coffin corner, where stall speed and critical Mach number converge. A few knots slow, and the wing quit. A few knots fast, and compressibility pushed you toward loss of control. In practice, that meant cruise became an exercise in holding a small speed window, while the aircraft burned off weight and the window moved beneath you. Pilots wore pressure suits because a cabin leak at that height meant decompression sickness and hypoxia within seconds. They limited maneuvering to flat, gentle corrections. Bank angles stayed shallow to avoid adding G-loads that the light wing could not carry comfortably for long durations. Fuel planning assumed little margin for detours, so route design had to thread winds and temperature layers to keep true airspeed and engine performance inside the envelope. The program ran under civilian cover and trained at a remote desert base. Crews learned to treat the aircraft like a surgical instrument. Mission planners stacked constraints: upper-level winds, jet stream displacement, weather fronts, and sun angles, because the camera system needed steady air, low haze, and shadows that pulled relief out of otherwise flat structures. A runway was not enough. The atmosphere itself had to cooperate. The cover story was not an afterthought. Public markings and NASA weatherplane language were part of the operating concept, designed to reduce escalation risk if a flight was glimpsed at the edge of a radar sweep or an emergency landing forced to stop outside friendly borders. The narrative and the airframe shared the same premise: stay above the fight, appear routine, and leave as little signature as possible. One way or another, it worked. The aircraft reached where nothing else could go and brought back the detail leadership needed. But the thin wing, the narrow speed band, and the reliance on a clean public explanation all built fragility into the system, technical and political at once. So, with that anti-climax, once defenses climbed higher and shot straighter, the very features that kept it safe at first turned into liabilities, and survival depended on more than altitude. Why did the wreckage brief better than Washington? Because twisted spars, serial plates, and unexposed film don't argue. They list facts. And on the 1st of May 1960, the facts lined up end-to-end across Soviet soil. Powers launched from Peshawar on a long, deliberate route, The plan threaded priority targets: Tyuratom, Sverdlovsk, and airfields and construction sites that signposted missile growth, and then pushed toward Norway. As it happened, the Soviet air defense network caught the incursion early, tracking data pooled from multiple radars, and command posts vectored fighters while queuing missile brigades to expected crossing points. Interceptors could not live where the U-2 cruised, so they climbed to where missiles might get a look. MiG-19S ran out of ceiling and energy. A Su-9 was pushed toward a ramming attempt but never made visual contact. The practical kill system was the S-75 Divina, and the crews fired. Near Sverdlovsk, a warhead detonation severed structure and rolled the aircraft into a departure. What followed matched the airframe's design logic. Light, unarmored sections separated, and the pilot exited with a parachute rather than with the wreckage. On the ground, the program's strengths turned into labeled exhibits. Recovery teams gathered the camera system, film canisters, and recognizable components with part numbers. The film, exposed and unexposed, linked the route to targets, and the optics spelled out intent. It was therefore trivial to show that this was a reconnaissance platform, not a meteorological sampler that had drifted with oxygen trouble. Khrushchev did not let the press office set the pace. He said Powers was alive and in custody, and he said the cameras and photographs were in Soviet hands. He then used those facts to nullify the NASA weather plane narrative before it could take root. By this point, the better briefing wasn't in Washington. It was on a table in Moscow, with fragments and film reels doing the explaining. The United States tried to keep the story aligned with peacetime research. Officials put out a weather mission from Turkey, cited oxygen difficulties, and rolled out a U-2 with NASA markings. But the Soviet display of wreckage and imagery, including identifiable airframe parts and covert photographs of military and nuclear installations, made that line untenable. The mission profile, altitude, route, targets, was now public, and the hardware matched. Diplomacy took the hit next. The Paris summit sat on the calendar, and the shoot-down sat in the headlines. Khrushchev demanded a halt to overflights. Eisenhower later acknowledged that he had authorized the flights, calling espionage a distasteful but vital necessity. One way or another, that admission closed the gap between what the aircraft had been doing for years and what the public had been told for days. The paradox is plain. An airplane engineered to be unreachable generated better propaganda for its adversary the moment it fell. Secrecy insulated the program operationally, but it also ensured that a single loss would feel larger than the airframe. When the cameras and film turned up, the debate about intent ended because the evidence was already framed. Payoff sits in the design choices. The high aspect ratio wing, minimal structure, and specialized cameras that enabled 70,000-foot flight also guaranteed that a successful intercept would scatter readable clues across miles. You did not need a confession when serials, glass, and unprocessed film drew a straight line from cockpit checklist to target set. By this point, manned overflight had shown its political cost. The risk migrated upward. Satellites would carry it, while the U-2 adapted. New sensors, new roles, and, improbably, a longer service life than anyone who wrote that original cover story would have forecast. A platform engineered to stay above confrontation exposed its mission the instant it failed, because fragments, optics, and film function like exhibits in a global courtroom. The aircraft tried to be absent. The debris testified. Satellite reconnaissance shifted the risk. Orbits could be predicted and negotiated, and hardware did not land in a farmer's field with serials attached. Coverage broadened, revisit rates improved, and leadership accepted the trade. Less exquisite angles than a tailored flight, but no prisoner and no wreckage tour. Tell us what to unpack next. Corona film canisters, KH-11 electro-optics, or the current U-2 sensor suite. The Dragon Lady still flies.